You know what I'm thinking about? There are too many gosh darn NHL games today. And we gotta fill out time for one more video, so we are gonna go over onto 32 thoughts and read Elliotte Friedman's piece on tax balance proposals. Now, okay, it's not going to be that boring, I promise you. Talking about taxes, talking about tariffs, talking about the money and the inner workings of the NHL and how all the extracurricular stuff in the world impacts that. That's kind of boring, but we do have some extra info from Friedman in regards to this man right here, the big GB, Gary Bettman. And some of the commentary that he had with the CBA and just how the league is going in general. I promise you, there are some very interesting things that we can read about in Friedman's 32 Thoughts, not necessarily about just money. So, the link to this article will be in the description, as well as our ExpressVPN affiliate page. This show is brought to you by Express. Check out that first link to save some money on your VPN, get some free months, and support this YouTube channel in the process. Let's skip past all of the tax and money talk that Friedman goes out there and talks about. Canadian bias, the dollar dropping. Okay, we can skip it, we can skip it, we can skip it. Austin Matthews, $11.634 million AAV. Let's skip that. Let's empty the GM notebook, but skip around to thought number 2. This is where things get really interesting. Gary Bettman spoke about the idea of an expanded playoffs, and he's dead set against it. I would expect the players to ask about changing the format to 1 versus 8 in each conference. Don't even think about 1 versus 16. Talk about travel nightmares. As one player texted on Wednesday, Dallas and Colorado are 3rd and 6th in the NHL. If there's a way to avoid having them meet in the first round, we should find it. One of the ways I look at the playoffs is not when you lose, but who you lose to. If the Abs and Stars do meet, I'm not going to look at the loser and say, that's an opening round playoff choker. That could be a Stanley Cup final. Now, it is interesting how Bettman is really against the 1-8-2-7-3-6-4-5 playoff matchup. That was also talked about by some of the other insiders. It does seem like Bettman is super set on what the playoff structure is right now, mostly because they want to drive up revenue sales with formulated rivalries. Hey, you've got these teams that are close by together, and they're going to meet in the playoffs in the first round, and it's going to happen pretty often. Dallas, Colorado, Winnipeg, all these teams playing off against each other year after year after year in the first round of the playoffs. Minnesota in there too, how could I forget? And ultimately it does kind of paint the sport in a weird way because you're not getting the best matchups at the end. Normally you would want to see the absolute best against the absolute best fight it out and play off against each other further along in the playoffs rather than seeing Dallas and Colorado, 2 of the top 6 teams in the NHL, playing in the first round. We know that it does open the door up for a few more, let's just say, underdog opportunities, the wild cards. It's rare to have a team like the LA Kings in 2012 be an 8th seed and win the Stanley Cup. But that's kind of the point, right? You want to punish teams for performing worse and barely squeaking in, and you want to give teams that are better a better chance at advancing early on. Not necessarily if they're playing off against a wild card team that force themselves into the playoffs because their division is super stacked or whatever. Like, it's kind of weird. Bettman does not really seem to be interested in that 1-8, etc. format. It does seem like there will be some pushback, but for now, this is what we are sticking with. Let's skip over onto the next interesting talking point here. Number 5 on Friedman's 32 Thoughts. Expanded 3-on-3 overtime, which energized fans during Canada-Sweden at the Four Nations, fizzled like my Western University pickup attempts. Players were concerned it wouldn't mean more opportunity for those who don't normally get it, but even more dependence on those who already do. Bettman referenced injury and ice conditions. I was reminded afterwards that Bettman is also very aware of the clock. He does not like longer games and has data that, outside of the playoffs, fans don't either. This season, 74% of games going into overtime end before the shootout, which is the highest rate ever. In 2014-15, the final season of 4-on-4, the number was 44% of games ending before the shootout, so they left it alone. This makes sense to me. I do, in theory, like the idea of longer overtimes, but when you think about the actual livable experience watching a game go over 10 minutes past regular game time. It does start to get a little bit draggy, and I think at the same time, this point does make sense too. Players were concerned it wouldn't mean more opportunity for those who don't normally get it, but some of the top guys are just going to be played even more, and that could lead to injuries and ice conditions being worsened, etc., etc. And then you have the shootout afterwards, which would be on top of an extended overtime. Maybe it's a little bit much. Especially with the fact that 74% of games going into overtime end in overtime before the shootout. The fact that it was 44% before, more games were ending in shootouts than in overtimes, yeah, it makes sense why they ended up changing from 4-on-4 to 3-on-3. And I think the way that they have it right now is pretty reasonable. I don't think a longer overtime would be worth it to having more of these games end in overtime instead of the shootout. Let's go out there and read number 6. At the November GM meetings, one GM laughed, recalling Bettman discussing the decentralized draft. He reminded us that this was our idea. He wasn't hiding that he didn't like it. He did it again on Tuesday, then publicly on Wednesday. After last season's super successful Sphere presentation, there was a conversation about reversing the decision to decentralize this June, but the commitment was already made, and it wasn't like every year was going to be at the Sphere. Now there's definitely buyer's remorse, as a couple of people are putting it. Bettman said there will be a full debrief afterwards, and he doesn't want any flip-floppery. Decide how the draft should be done and stick with it. My vote, everyone there. It's hockey's thing, and the sport should be proud of that. Bettman also made it clear he wants all first-rounders in attendance, so Central Scouting and the teams will have to work together on that. I've already heard from some prospects nervous about paying their way to get there and sitting there longer than they want since more than 32 prospects will be asked to go. No one likes seeing that. A virtual room is being created where players will meet their new team, while the league is working on guests to announce the selections. Celine Dion and Michael Buffer were tremendous last year. Those named to the NHL's 21st Century team may be on site, so they could announce the picks too. And with that, the decentralized draft certainly is weird. The Sphere did seem to be really interesting last year. Of course, I wasn't there, but it was awesome to watch on TV, just the vibes and the atmosphere bleeding through my television screen. So it is interesting to hear that Sphere talk was so good that there may be some sort of a buyer's remorse in the way the NHL already committed to decentralizing the draft this upcoming June. It's going to be weird, man. All the prospects are going to be there, but no teams. And they're going to talk about all these prospects, but only the first rounders. So if you're a first round projected guy, but you end up slipping to round 2, you're not going to have that opportunity to hear your name called, which of course is not new. We have seen first round caliber prospects miss out on being drafted in the first round in prior drafts. But the difference was when they would inevitably get drafted, they would be greeted with the team and they would be able to walk by all the other teams and they'd be able to immerse themselves in the NHL experience right away. It's going to be very strange to see how the decentralized draft goes. The first year, they're willingly doing it out of choice. Last time they did a decentralized draft, what was it, 2021? 2020? It was the COVID years. They had no choice but to do it. But now it's like, oh, we got to do it again. Everybody's going to be in a theater, but no teams are going to be there. So interesting how the NHL is deciding to do this. The rest of this article goes over a whole bunch of other stuff. All-star conversation. It's going to be crazy, man. I mean, All-Star game after the Four Nations last year, and then the Olympics too? Please, just cancel the All-Star game, guys. I know they already announced it, so it's hard to do that, but I don't think anybody's really interested in having another All-Star game. There are conversations about goalie interference and other clips and stuff, and then there are a few extra things about teams and player updates, Rick Tocchet and stuff in here too. But I wanted to focus more so on Gary Bettman's thoughts on the league, overtime, decentralized draft, as well as the playoff routes. So I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about some of these talking points? Do you think 1 versus 8 is better than the current divisional system with the wild cards we have in the playoffs? What are your thoughts on the decentralized draft being a thing, and what are your thoughts on 3-on-3 overtime? Should the NHL extend overtime in the same way they did in the Sweden versus Canada game? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.